There are sights which men behold that affords an insight into life beyond this reality. This was to happen to me, and I am telling you this gruesome tale now of the unspeakable horrors I have experienced. On this 13th of April in the old interurban depot outside Markham. Reports of an obscure boxcar which had picked up a delivery at the obscure port of Little Ferry in New Jersey and made its way to Markham by a circumventous route of mundane and rustic ramshackle route of secondary railroads, interurbans and decrepit branch lines into downtown interurban depot, out of sight, out of mind. Whatever was picked up at Little Ferry had begun to grow during its transshipment. A 40-foot boxcar had been breached, and the railroad workers had run out of the depot talking of an unspeakable monster. I went down there to have a look, and what my eyes beheld, the flash from my automatic revolver as I fired aimlessly towards its direction, will never erase from my consciousness. For what I beheld was a horror so unspeakable that even to this day I hope I may awake from this nightmare and find out that it was just all that, a dream, a phantom of my imagination. But what appeared before my eyes at the interurban depot that night of April 30th, 1921, I can never erase. Well, good evening all. If you don't think I'm completely bonkers before this, now you probably will. Anyway, it doesn't matter. One of my hobbies is miniatures and models. So that's been for many years, and they're expensive. And what you saw there was a cheap Balrog that I had made from this plastic dragon. Now, if you buy these miniatures, the real ones online, they're incredibly expensive, and so I've been converting and rebuilding models for a long time, and I got this dragon in a pound shop, well, a euro shop for €1. And I came up with the idea of converting this guy into a Lovecraftian-type monster. There's a lot of Lovecraft-type board games and RPG games coming on the market now. And so I thought it'd be an interesting project, and I'll share you how I do these kinds of things, how I build these models and convert them. So the first thing I do is I take the limbs off the creature. This weird kind, it's a weird kind of, I don't know, aquatic dragon. It couldn't really fly with those small wings. And by removing the limbs and then taking the head off, decapitating it, I can look at the shape and from that determine if it could be converted into something else, because the limbs and the head tend to prejudice the model in terms of which way is up, which way is down. And you can see as soon as they're off already, it already has that kind of Lovecraftian, sort of like despicable seafood look to it. And so this gives me an idea if I could convert this upside down, use some of the holes to put back the arms in the opposite direction, and maybe fill in the others, and then build new holes and complete a tail. Now there's the Balrog again. Now I see where I filled in there to make a fire around its head, and I also built the horns. And how I did that was with this product here. It's called Green Stuff. The green stuff is a two-part epoxy putty. There's the green and the blue part, the yellow and the blue part, and when you blend both of them together, you come up with a kind of a putty you can work on that hardens in 24 hours. You can carve it, you can shape it. That's the packet it comes in. So one is the activator and one is the putty, and that allows you to construct models on armatures from scratch, or sculptures, anything you want. But in this case, I'm going to be making new features on this creature. Here's the tools I use. These are basic, very cheap modeling tools used in ceramics and all those kinds of things, model building. You can pick them up very cheap most places. I use these paddle drill bits as well. They're useful. A ballpoint pen is useful because you can actually carve out holes, and all kinds of sticks and anything you can find like that, including these wires, building extra parts. You're going to need the armatures, and those kind of not Sharpie pens, those pilot type pen tops are very useful as well for carving. And so I'm going to fill in these holes, and here's the first hole part filled in. You can see that at the top which used to be the bottom set of limbs, I've put the green stuff on and carved and fabricated to look like the folds in the skin of the rest of the creature's body. And so that's completely filled in. I also removed the arms and flipped them around the opposite direction. And this gave it a much more interesting look. It's almost like kind of pleading. This thing is like, it's almost like as much as it's attacking you, it's pleading, put me out of my agony. And again, I filled in the joints in the arms with green stuff, but I also did that because I wanted the arms to be more pronounced and stick out forward, be more naturalistic looking in the upside down position. And at the tail there, I will fabricate a new tail for the creature. The first thing I did was the eyes. Here's the eye here. Now, the eyes were tricky. I filled in the center part with rolled of paper just so the green stuff wouldn't sink into the middle. And then began using pictures online. I think this is a crocodile or something, as references, and also images of monsters and books I have, to carve the eye out and to shape the eye using the tools. And the eyes are very tricky, but because it's a monster, it's a lot easier because you can get away with more. Now the bottom part there, I have to put a tail on that, and that tail will complete the creature. And here it is after I sprayed it with brown primer. You can see the tail is now in there, and you can also see I put an extra bunch of limbs on the bottom to make the thing look like it's walking towards you. The two eyeballs, I wasn't happy with them, and also the back, I discovered a break on the back, the kind of like that spinal line, which I refabricated, and I put two extra supraorbital bone ridges on top of the monster's eyes to make the eyes more pronounced and sinister. As well as that, there were some gaps in joints from the toy that were in the arms and the limbs, which I refilled in again. That's the great thing about using the grey primer. You can actually see the defects. It brings the shadows and light out. Next page on this would be to paint the thing. And here it is after an initial painting. I use acrylic paints and I use spray paints to highlight the details. I don't have an airbrush, I use regular spray paints. In this case, just a white on top. It doesn't really show it well in this picture, but the white is to show light. This proboscis, this was the tail of the dragon, is now formed to a kind of like a toxic ooze dripping proboscis that probably lubricates the movement of the creature, but also probably digests its prey as it's coming towards it. And I painted that in a fluorescent pink, and the body is in a mixture of red and blue spray paints in order to give it a purple fleshy tone. The back, I ran a very liquid acrylic dark red along that, also to create the sense. See, when you have a uniform color, you don't have life. You have to have variations in tones in order to make the thing look realistic. You will not get that just by slapping on a single color. The eyes I painted black and put a dot in the middle. They don't show up well in the picture here, but they look much better at the end. Now here's the magic. In order to make all the folds and the creases in the skin show up and all the shadows and accentuate them, you dip your models, after they've been painted, into polyurethane varnish. Not the water-based polyurethane varnish, but the solvent-based polyurethane varnish. This has two effects. Because the pigments in polyurethane varnish are so fine that it will eventually, as it sits drying in the upright position, the pigment will fall into every gap inside the model. Also, because this stuff tends to be thick, I diluted 80%. So 80% is the polyurethane varnish. The other 20% is white spirits, and that gives me the consistency where it flows freely down the model, but also seals it as well. And basically what you just do is you just dip the guy in. If I'm doing a smaller model, I will put them on, and then you scrape off the excess. If I'm doing smaller models, like small figures, I put them on a drill bit. I put the drill bit in there, take it out and spin it inside a box. Now don't use this stuff in your living room. I have an art studio. It's designed to be messed up like this, because this stuff, when it gets on anything, you're screwed. It's really nasty stuff in terms of staining and stuff. But it does magical things to models, miniatures, like you would not believe. I don't know where this technique was invented, but whoever came up with this idea was a genius. So in America you have Minwax, here we have Ronstein in Europe and some other brands, but it must be the solvent-based one, not the water-based one. Now I will leave that sitting up there and then use a brush to wipe off the excess. You can already see it gathering and forming off the kind of the tentacles or wherever they are of the creature. Now it looks pretty animal at first, pretty intense, and it looks very messy. But what you basically will be left with is a basic coating, and this coating of the polyurethane varnish will carry within it enough pigment to highlight all the necessary folds in the skin. And there's another aspect to this as well, because this polyurethane varnish dries with a high gloss. If I was doing a figure, I would spray it with a flat acrylic varnish to take a bit of matte effect, to take the shine off it. But because this is kind of like a Lovecraftian, it's supposed to be a kind of a Lovecraftian creature from another dimension, viscous, liquidy, disgusting, I'm going to leave the varnish on. But if you're doing this and you're spraying a creature or a monster or a figure, you'll have to redo the eyes, because the eyes have no life if they're matte. They have to have that liquidy aspect to them. So here you can see me just using an old brush, don't use your best brushes, to scrape, or cheap brushes. You scrape the excess polyurethane varnish off the model in the upright position, so as it starts to form, it will roll into you can already see it happening, rolling into the joints and the gaps in the creature. This can take a while. It's a bit tricky for me here because I'm holding one hand with the camera and the other hand is I'm doing it with my right hand, so it's a bit tricky. Normally I'm holding two hands, holding it in a vice grips or a pliers or something at the base. And because I've used a cardboard base for this, I didn't have any plastic card left. The polyurethane varnish will harden the base as well. So if somebody's using this in the game, you can really see now how the polyurethane varnish is really falling naturally into the folds and bringing this creature to life. It's what it's doing. It's accentuating where natural shadows would form. And this is a tremendous painting technique, and is so useful in everything from jewelry to anything you can think of, that the excess of varnish will find its own gravity and its own level in much the same way. And I'm using a dark oak stain. You can really see now how it's rolling off the bottom, but it's being caught by the folds in the skin. And this thing is, now this creature's coming alive. The tones of the original garish tones are now vanishing. It's highlighting and accentuating every detail. And we have a Lovecraftian monster. This is very much the kind of like the despicable kind of seafood things he described. I'm a huge Lovecraft fan, and I'll often listen to Lovecraft audiobooks while I'm making these things. So there's the dried now. It's the polyurethane varnish is dried, and you can just see how the detail has come to life. It looks real. It looks alive. It looks like a piece of walking liver. It looks like it's, and I'm not even bothered by those excess things on the end there, because that happens in creatures in real life. We're not creating anything perfect here, but what we're going for is an effect. Remember, this thing is purely a fantasy miniature, fantasy model, not rooted in anything real. Now, the important thing now is to base it. I always base my miniatures with and then put grass or stone on them. And this is a flock or a scatter material I make myself. What I do is I get sawdust from my woodwork projects and I dye it with acrylic paints in different tones and shades, and that will just simulate grass. You glue it on by liberally, and I mean liberally, putting on 100% undiluted PVA glue. You Americans call that white glue, and this will hold down the flock or the scatter material, and you cannot water it down. You have to go on full in here. Now I picked a very tricky model to do it, because it's going to get on some of the limbs as I'm putting it in the middle. That really can't be helped, but you can wipe it off. That's the beauty of using PVA glue, because it's a water-based glue. You can really see how beautifully the eye came out in that there. The folds on the eye, which used to be its frontal limbs in the original model. Turning it upside down makes it look like its skin is hanging off it, which adds to the sort of the horrific effect. You can tell I grew up watching a lot of horror films and Doctor Who and sci-fi and things like that. And yeah, I'm a big boy at heart. I'll never change. I mean, I just enjoy these things. And as I was saying, there's lots of Lovecraftian role-playing games and models and type scenarios coming on the market. So these models would be a very cheap and inexpensive way of, I'm just brushing off the excess PVA as much as I can to begin with, removing the glue so that it doesn't get covered in grass on the body itself, and with a different clean brush, by the way. And so these models can be a way of getting into those board games and into those role-playing games, not just the Lovecraftian ones, but other kind of games too. I like building dioramas, and I've actually got commissions now for building some historical dioramas. So there's a practical thing in here for me as well. It's also, it's also a good way to make some extra money if you can develop these skills, and also it's just tremendous fun. It's great fun for a family. Now, this is how you just put the scatter material on. Just basic sawdust. I dye it in mainly 2 tones of green, and also a small amount in red, and a small amount in yellow, and a small amount in raw sienna, which is a light brown. And that gives it a naturalistic grass look. It's not just all green. There's actual subtle tones. Being an artist, I'm very aware of how the natural world looks, and if you're going to go trouble of building these models and miniatures, if you can make them look as realistic and as interesting as possible. I'll show you other ones where I put stones and bits of trees in other videos if you like this one. But it just makes them, it just adds to the fun, adds to the experience. And I don't, like, my house is full of like bits and pieces like this I've been doing for years. And it's just, I started out building the Aurora monster kits back in the 1970s when I was about 8 or 9. And it just took off from there. I can't go to places like Forbidden Planet and spend those kind of money, or Games Workshop on those miniatures, even as fantastic as they are. I mean, they're just so incredibly expensive. When, with a bit of imagination, some basic artistic and modeling and DIY skills, I'm using this. This is an old hard coarse fan brush to remove the excess grass that fell on the model. There'll always be an element of the model be a little bit tacky for a few days afterwards. This one wasn't too bad. It dried pretty quick. That's another reason why we dilute the varnish. It speeds up the drying time of the polyurethane much more quickly. And so that's basically it. It's finished. From a dragon to this Lovecraftian monster. This is the effect I wanted. I'm very happy how this turned out. I would say in total that this model cost me, everything included, about €1.20. And now we have the obligatory before and after. On the left there is the plastic pound shop, Euro shop dragon, toy made in some sweatshop in China, that provided really just only the body, and on the right there the finished Lovecraftian miniature, and again demonstrating the excellence of the polyurethane dripping technique on the paintwork. Okay, hope you enjoyed that.